Center of Beijing when a man walked to the middle of the avenue of eternity.
Well, all right. Welcome back to the Survival and Basic Badass podcast with Kevin, Chuck, and Chris. Now,
What's
Chris
going on,
has an
everybody?
amazing story. Morning. Chris has an amazing story of coming across the U.S. Mexico border. And I don't know. Let's kind of jump right into it. Chris, tell us what you got.
No, great. First off, thanks for having me back, guys. I absolutely love your podcast. I mean, you guys are just straight legit, and I love this. And if you're watching this on YouTube and you guys haven't hit that like and subscribe button, you need to because these guys are on top of it, and I absolutely love being a guest here. So thanks for having me back. First off, guys, it's really a pleasure to be here.
Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
it's nice having you here.
No, it's great. I love it. So yeah, I wanna preface this story a little bit because we talk about like illegal border crossings and stuff like that all the time. I want to explain that everything I did here was completely legal and within the boundaries of the law. So there, it's though it would be cool to be like, yeah, I used a coyote to get across the border, and I traveled underneath a semi trailer. Sadly, it's not that type of story because I wanted to do everything legal.
Right.
Because I support law and order, I support legal immigration. What I don't support is illegal immigration, and that's obviously a big problem right now. And I can kind of talk about what I saw while I was down there because I was legit on the border.
Yeah.
So again, a little preface on this. So I married a lady from Ukraine in 2018. We actually met in 2016 in Ukraine. There was no conflict at that point. There was everything going on in the East, which was kind of like a warm, you know, World War One type thing, like we're shooting shots across the trenches and nothing really happens, until later. But yeah, it's so we met in 2016. I brought her here legally again on a fiance K1 visa. We got married in 2018, and of course, when everything started in February of 22, that was a day that I'll never personally forget because my wife comes to me. She's telling me that there are explosions all over Ukraine and things like that, and so it was nasty the first couple weeks, to be honest with you. And her mother was still there in Ukraine. Obviously, I wasn't able to bring her over, and so here's kind of how things went down. So this is a literal live bug out situation. Okay, we talk about in the prepping community getting your bug out bags ready, and a lot of people are like, "Oh, dude, I'll never do that." You might. And this is a perfect example of what a real bug out situation will look like. So, her mother lives in southern Ukraine in her town. The town's called Nikolaev. It's basically in between Odessa, which I think everybody knows about now. It's the port city down there on the south, and then Kherson. Kherson's kind of like where they had the city split in half by the river. So they're basically sandwiched in between that. And there is a military base in Nikolaev, so there was a lot of bombing there for the first couple weeks. There was like shooting going on in the street. From what I understand, there was like Spetsnaz that basically like paradropped in, and they were masquerading as being locals and just causing havoc all around. So it's like they had strict curfew laws at night. Like if you were outside and you got caught outside at night, it was pretty much without question. So it was pretty nasty to start off with. There was shooting going on in the streets. Like I heard, like when my wife was talking to my mother-in-law over, the internet, you could hear the gunfire in the streets. It was
Yeah.
crazy to start off with.
Crazy.
So the first step was getting her out of Ukraine, right? So this part I can't say that I was able to do personally, but I was there kind of helping things along. So I had a group of people who had done the same thing that I did, who had, met their lady in Ukraine and were trying to get people out. And so I was able to get on various Telegram channels and things like that that were organizing rides for people who were trying to get out of the city. And there was a point where on bug out day, for lack of a better term, uh, we there were two options for us. There was a friend of mine who had somebody who knew who had a car that was going to pick up some people there in her town, and then there were going to be buses that were supposed to take people to the border because they were trying to evacuate people from the combat zone, right? And she went to the bus stop and it was just packed. Like there were hundreds upon hundreds of people there waiting to try and get on these buses. And then we have this decision. Well, do we go for the car or do we stay for the buses? Eventually, we decided to go for the car, which was the right choice because the buses actually never showed up. So first, what actually happened was the people who were driving these buses basically contacted their friends and family, said, "Meet us here. We'll pick you up and take you to the border." So if there's a prepper lesson here, when we're in S.H.T.F, people are going to look out for number one and for their
Yeah.
family and friends first. So if you think that the government is going to come and save you, think again. So that, yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
No, it just seems that, the government is made up of people. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And people are, like you said, people are going to look out for themselves. And it seems like that really is something to keep in mind. You got to count on
You've
yourself
noticed
and
that
and
as
your
a
family.
theme in our current government, that they
A little
look
bit.
out for themselves and
Little
their
bit.
friends. Yeah. So, all right.
It would be a slow burn saying, he feels like the bus would be a moving target. Yeah. But at that point, they weren't really targeting civilians because we're talking about the first couple weeks of the war was where we're at here. So they were still, hitting military targets for the most part. They were hitting train stations as well, but not as much because, again, I think they were trying to preserve the infrastructure at that time. Now that's different now. So we went with the car. Thankfully, the person came to pick her up. They were able to get to the border. They actually went through, what was it? It was Slovakia, if I'm not mistaken. It's right there. I'd have to pull up a map. I can't remember, honestly. But they went through there. They then took the train from there to Austria, and then she went from Austria to Poland, Gdansk, Poland. It's in the northern part. It's there by the sea there on the north. And that's where she stayed for about a month. And during this time, we were trying to figure out how can we get her mother here. Because we want to, take care of her, and it would be cheaper for us to provide for her here than having to provide for her apartment, her food, stuff like that over there in Poland. So,
Right.
of course, we're looking for all legal avenues, right? We're not looking to, have my mother-in-law swim across the Rio Grande, and meet her with a four-wheeler on the other side, which would be hilarious, but not exactly the best option. So, we are trying to figure out how can we do this? Can we go through, the legal channels for immigration? And I called, my senators, representatives. We actually have a representative here in Indiana where I'm from, who's from Ukraine. And I called her office. She's technically not my representative. So they're like, yeah, there's not much we can do for you, but let us know if you need like some if we can help put pressure anywhere for you once they do this. But they're like, really, the only ways to do it legally is to bring what we call is family reunification, which is like a year wait time. And of course, at the beginning of this conflict, there was a lot of rhetoric going on. Let's just put it that way. And there still is. I know you guys, we just did a discussion about this, and it's just getting out of hand over there, to say the least. But we're like, we don't know when we're going to be able to get her here if we use the legal process. So I was talking again. I had a group of guys that I was talking with who had done the same thing, and there was an older gentleman who was trying to get his daughter-in-law here. So his wife was older, had a child already, and so they went to the embassy in Germany. They tried to get her a visitor visa. They tried to do everything, and they just got rejected on the spot. Everything. So, which makes absolutely no sense to me, right? Because like at the beginning of the conflict, the current administration said we're going to take 200,000 refugees. We're not going to tell you how to get them here, which is pretty typical, I would say, for the current admin. It's like, yeah, we're going to do this. We're not going to say how we're going to do it, but we're going to do it because we're awesome and we're big social justice warriors, and we're gung ho. You can tell how I feel about the current administration. I think that that's kind of mirrored here with our
yeah, that's pretty accurate. Yep.
Yeah. So, pretty typical, right? So, what they found out they could do is you can go to the border, and at any point of entry in the United States, you can claim what's called humanitarian parole. Now, this is why they don't let people transit through the United States without a visa, because the minute you land in the United States, you can request this, this humanitarian parole to stay here legally for a year. Now, that's different than refugee status. So refugee status is what we hear with everybody crossing illegally, right? Where they get all this stuff and the government provides them everything. And, here's your cell phone, here's your government check, here's your free healthcare, all that junk. That we're doing for all these people who are crossing illegally. What we had to do with humanitarian parole, there's no support at all. You basically get like emergency insurance only, which doesn't cover anything, I might add. I'll tell you that later. about that. And that's pretty much it. You basically are here for a year, and it's you get into the United States, but they pat you on the back and they say good luck. So this gentleman was able to take his daughter to Tijuana, which was the big place where people were crossing at that time. They were able to cross the border. They got her here on humanitarian parole. So next prepper lesson for you guys. A network is so critically important in any situation, whether it be bug out situation, survival, S.H.T.F. Having that community around you of people who are like-minded, who have the same goals that you are, and who want to survive is so important. So if you guys don't have, like a group of people that you can trust, and you're like, okay, how can we handle this situation? In a survival sense, you're in a very disadvantage if you're a lone wolf. So, guys, start building your networks now while everything is safe. And to that point, I actually had somebody reach out to me from the last show that we did, who actually lives fairly close to me. And I emailed him earlier. We're going to meet up sometime and chat. So if you're here, brother, glad to get your email. I'll write you back and we'll find a time to get together. But yeah, guys, get your networks together now, because that can mean the difference between life and death. And if I hadn't spoke to this gentleman and kind of understood how the process worked, I wouldn't have been able to have done anything that I already did. So really important, guys, get your networks together and get going. So I had this phone call with this gentleman. He said, yeah, basically all you got to do is you got to show up with the border with your person, and you're good to go. I'm like, well, that seems simple enough. Famous last words.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That sounds easy. Hold my beer. Yeah. Famous last words, right? So I talked to the wife. Wife was in nursing school at the time. And I was like, okay, honey, like, this is what happened. We don't know how they're going to let these refugees in otherwise. It's like, this may be our only shot, right? Because if they're going to, inflict basically a strict quota, it's like, we got to do this now, or there may be no other chance. And so I talk with my parents and stuff like that, because I have an older daughter, and so I need some help with her. I talk with the wife, and we're like, yeah, okay, let's do it, right? So all of this happened in like the span of 12 hours. I had my flight to Poland. I was packed the night before, and I drove to Chicago the next day and got on a flight at O'Hare, and off I went. So when these situations happen, sometimes you have to act quickly and decisively. And I think that that's another, prepper lesson that we can have, is inaction is a choice. If you just kind of sit there and decide, I'm not going to do anything, that is the decision. And then whatever happened to you kind of is your own decision. It's on you. Exactly. And, so when you have this moment, you have to act. You have to, for lack of a better term, for all our male listeners here, you got to be the man and take charge. And this is not to, for all of our lady listeners, you can take charge too. But whoever you are, if you're faced with this decision, you need to make a decision and be like, okay, this is what we're doing. Let's go. And oftentimes you see this in, the military. I was never in the military myself, but I've heard about it from combat veterans and things like that. It's like, the worst thing you can do is just sit there and do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing in any survival situation. So next prepper lesson there is just take action. At least move forward some direction. So I was looking for flights, right, to get us out of Poland into Mexico. And I literally could not find any, because everybody at that point, all the Ukrainians were like, okay, we got to get over the border, because it started floating around in all of these Telegram chats. So I'm like, okay, let's just get over there. Let's get the mother-in-law and figure out how the heck we're going to do it from there, because I don't have time. Because like I said, this all happened in the span of like less than 12 hours. We're like, okay, yeah, it's go time. Let's roll.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It is. So another great lesson that'll come up later is pack light. For everybody who has like a 50-pound bug out bag, I highly recommend you try walking around with that for like 8 hours.
Mm-hmm.
I packed a backpack with minimal stuff. I had no checked bags. It was all on my backpack, and that was it. And that served me well enough to get back to the United States in a rather roundabout way. So I get to Poland, right? And I had figured all this out. I had booked myself a hotel. It was actually fairly reasonably priced. And it was actually really nice. Everybody there spoke English. And it was only like a mile and a half away from the airport. I'm like, this is perfect, right? And I'm thinking to myself, okay, when I get there, I land in Poland, no problem. go through customs. Of course, I got the American passport. So it's like, yep, you can come in, no problem. Get there. And I'm like, all right, how am I going to get to the hotel? So I looked at it and I'm like, dude, I walk like a mile and a half, 3 miles with the dog every day. I can walk a mile and a half through Warsaw, right? So I punch it in on my phone. I'm like, okay, yeah, no problem. It says it'll take me half an hour to get there. I'm like, yeah, right. It's going to take me like 20 minutes. No, it took half an hour. So I start going, and I basically walk through the armpit of Warsaw, for lack of a better term. It was nasty. And it was the point where I'm like, we could potentially be in a dangerous situation here. I was walking like under overpasses for their interstate system there. I didn't see any homeless people, but it was clear to me that there had been homeless people in the area that I was walking through, because there was like a mattress on the side. I'm like, I don't want to know what happened on that mattress. But when I was in this situation, I'm like, okay, maybe we should have used public transport. So if you can get public transport in a situation like this, it's probably going to be a lot safer than hoofing it if you don't know the area. Like, I walked through a construction site. I walked through, I don't want to say a homeless camp, because again, there wasn't anybody there, but maybe they were out grifting at the time. I don't know. But I'm like, okay, we just need to get through this area as quickly as possible. And one thing that I can say is having confidence in a situation like this it gives you an aura that, you can handle the situation. So basically, if you feel like you're in a dangerous situation, looking as confident as possible can be off-putting to people who might want to do you harm.
Right.
So another great prepper lesson there for you. If you're in a situation like this, you don't want to be like, looking down at your feet, trying to not make eye contact. Now, I'm not going to be like, staring somebody down or something like that, trying to give them the 1,000-yard stare, but I'm also not going to appear weak either. Thankfully, I didn't have any type of confrontation, but when I was walking through the construction site, I basically walked through like I was the damn foreman, or I knew somebody. No one asked me anything. And there were people working. There's heavy machinery going on. I just I'm going. Yeah. Man with a purpose, for lack of a better term.
That's right.
So get to the hotel, get checked in. Great staff at the hotel. I text the wife. I'm like, okay, I made it. Everything's good. I didn't mention to her the fact that I just walked through the armpit of Warsaw, because she would have been kind of pissed off at me for that. And I'm like, where's your mom? She's like, she's a good hour and a half out. I'm like, good, I can take a shower, because I need it. I've been on a flight for the last 12 hours. And international flights are not exactly fun unless you know how to handle it. And so I get showered. Mother-in-law shows up, and now we have the adventure of finding out how in the world we're going to get her to Mexico, because like I said, all of the flights from Tijuana were sold out at this point. So I'm like, okay, again, we need to make progress. Sitting here in Poland does us nothing. So how can we get to Mexico? Right. And so I found a flight from where we were through Zurich and then Heathrow, which is in the UK, and then direct to Mexico City after that. Again, like I told you at the beginning, we couldn't transit through the United States because they won't let her in without a visa. Right. Even if you're just laying over, they won't let you in. They won't even let you on the plane because of what I said earlier about humanitarian parole. So I found this flight. It was for the next day. So again, all this is happening incredibly fast. Basically, I look online. I'm like, okay, where do I need visas for her? I know that I don't need any. I hate to be, elitist about that, but it's just the truth, guys. Your U.S. passport can get you in a lot of places without any type of visa.
And like you said, it's so important that you and kind of everybody in your family get a passport and just have it, because you never know. Like you said, this was a spur of the moment kind of thing. And,
right. If you had to go and get a passport then
today, you can't wake up in the morning and be like, yeah,
we're going. Yeah,
anyway,
no, it takes time. And let me tell you guys, the wait time on passports is only getting longer. So if you don't have one, make the investment in yourself. Just make sure you get the book, not the card. The card sucks. The passport card, get the normal book, and you're good to go for that. And that's good for 10 years. The renewal process is incredibly easy once you have it, but getting it that first time is a real pain in the rear end. Because I know, if I recall, you need your actual birth certificate. So if you don't have that, you're going to need to go get it. And of course, anything dealing with the government takes time.
Right.
So, okay. Slowburn says he got his in 3 weeks. That's really good. I will say that from what I understand, some places go faster than others. But yeah, if you can get one now, better do it now while it's easy.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
So I'm looking through for all the visas, right? I'm looking at the UK. Okay, we don't need a visa for the UK because we're transiting. We need a visa for Mexico. So I go in there. I'm trying to get this visa for Mexico. Can't get it. It's like it won't take my card. Text back to mom back here in the United States. Hey, I'll send you the money. Can you get this for me? No problem. She puts it in 100% easy. I'm like, okay, well, why did it do it for her and not for me? The glory of the internet. What can I say? And I called my bank and everything before I left. I'm like, hey, this is happening. Approve my charges. You know, it's like unless
Right.
it's, I'll keep an eye on everything and I'll let you know if there's anything wrong.
Right.
So we get the visa for Mexico, or at least I think so. And next day we go to the airport. I took the taxi this time,
Mhm.
and we get there. And at this point, it was the first moment that I understood that if I wasn't there with my mother-in-law, this would never happen. She doesn't speak a lot of English, and by a lot, I mean only a couple words.
Uh-huh.
And again, having that passport with me, having the power
The
behind the
cloud
U.S.
of an
passport,
American. Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, and that's the thing, guys. If you have an advantage, leverage it when you can. You know, not for evil, but you know, if you can get yourself an advantage in a situation, do it. You know, whether you think you're playing fair or not, because in a bug out situation, in an S.H.T.F situation, I think we're less concerned about what's fair and what isn't.
Mhm.
So we get to the airport. We have to go get the test, you know, because it was that time when they were still requiring that. And I won't say the word because I don't want to get you guys in trouble. But we went and did that. We go down to get checked in. And of course, at this point, they're like, oh, well, where's her visa for this? I'm like, there it is. They're like, look over everything. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, mother-in-law would have never made it. If I had just, because
Right.
one of the gentlemen that I talked to, like, oh, yeah, I just sent her to Mexico and I met her in Mexico. My mother-in-law had never traveled international before. And
Mhm.
it's an experience if you've never done it. So, you know, I had everything there ready for her. I was there with her. We go through. Minute we get through security, Wi-Fi in the airport just dies. So it's like I can't text the wife because it's like I need the Wi-Fi to do that. So she has no idea what's going on. So prepper lesson for you here: expect things to go wrong in your journey. So don't expect that plan A is going to be the plan that works for you the entire way, because there are so many different variables in these situations. Something is going to go wrong, but being able to think on the fly and act independently is critical for survival in these types of things. So yes, you have plan A, but have plan B, C, D, E, and F all the way through Z, and be able to adjust. That's a critical thing, because if you can't adjust on the fly with these things, you there's a saying. It's like, you know, we make plans and God laughs. You know, I think that that's very accurate in situations like this, because nothing ever goes to plan. And I can tell you, this trip, nothing went to plan. So
Mhm.
have that backup plan ready. Yeah. Do you guys want to say something? Okay.
No, no.
Okay. You just look like you're ready. I didn't want to cut you off. So I'm like, okay, the wife has no idea what's going on. We're going to Zurich next. So I'm like, all right, let's go to Zurich, and hopefully they have Wi-Fi there. So we get on the plane. We go to Zurich. They feed us a chocolate bar, about yay big. It's like a little chocolate square. So yay for airline food. And I didn't have breakfast, and that'll come up a little later. We get to Zurich. We get to our gate. We have Wi-Fi. I text the wife, hey, everything's okay. We just lost Wi-Fi in the airport at Warsaw. Get there. I go to our gate, and there's no plane. And we only had like an hour and a half layover. I'm like, well, this isn't good. And they said, I think it was something like, we'll announce announcement coming at something like 10 o'clock, right? And that was our departure time. I'm like, well, that's not good. So they come on the intercom. They basically say that our flight had not left Scotland at that point, and that they were going to be an hour and a half to 2 hours late. I'm like, well, that means our connection is shot, because we only had about 2 hours in Heathrow. So I was hopeful that maybe our flight to Mexico City got delayed too, but sadly that was not the case. So plane shows up, we get on, we get to Heathrow about 2 hours late. We got there about 2 in the afternoon local time. They fed us a Nutri-Grain bar, big, you know, big expensive stuff here. And we get to Heathrow, and our flight to Mexico had already left. If there's one thing about most like transatlantic flights, is they usually leave on time for the most part. So I'm like, okay, we're going to have to figure out how we're going to do this. Now, I, of course, did not have a visa for the mother-in-law to stay in the UK. So I'm scrambling, trying to figure out what in the world we're going to do. But I'm like, let's just get our tickets figured out first. So we go to the British Airways ticketing desk. And I am not joking when I say this. We literally stood in line for 8 hours.
Wow.
Yeah. No food. They gave us water bottles. And so this is a great prepper lesson for everybody. Prioritize water over food. I know in the prepper community, we're like, beans, bullets, and band-aids, right? The big 3 Bs.
Mhm.
All about that. But I will say that you can survive a whole lot longer on water than you can on without it. I'll put it that way. So yes, it's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to have those hunger pangs initially, but you can overcome that because they will go away. They don't stay with you like all the time. And
Right.
I think that's really important because you can mediate that with water and be okay. So at this point, I hadn't eaten basically for about 18 hours. And you'd be like, oh, that's not that bad. Yeah, you try it and tell me how
Mhm.
you feel. So we finally get up there and we find out what happened was there was they said it was a technical problem with the British Airways computer system. I'm saying it was Russian hackers. But I have no evidence of that, but it just felt right. So we get up there finally to the ticketing office. They're like, oh, we've already booked you. Here's your voucher for your hotel. Here's your, your voucher for your taxi ride to get there. Your flight's tomorrow at the normal time. It was like, I think it's like 1 in the afternoon or something like that, local time in the UK. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm like, here, do have a little bit of a problem. It's like the mother-in-law doesn't have a visa to stay here. He's like, oh, where's she's from? I'm like, she's from Ukraine. He's like, dude, she's from Ukraine. I'm like, yeah. He's like, dude, you got no problem. I'm like, okay, good. So here's another thing that you guys can learn. So I went up to the customs officer, right? And I said to the guy, listen, I was talking to the people back at the British Airways booth, and they said to come to the coolest guy at customs, and they said that was you to get this taken care of. And he absolutely loved it. And I think one thing to remember, you're going to be cranky in these situations, right? It's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to be out of your comfort zone. You're not going to, enjoy what you're doing. I just stood in line for 8 hours. I could be pissed off if I wanted to,
Right.
right? I could have been a jerk. I could have been like, dude, how are we going to effing fix this, right?
Yeah.
But instead, if you take, a more positive approach, especially when you're dealing with people and you want them to help you, coming at it and making them feel special or, adding some levity to the situation can make a huge difference in your outcome. So the dude laughed. He absolutely loved it. He's like, yeah, what's going on? I'm like, yeah, our flight was, delayed getting here. We missed our connection. I don't have a visa for the mother-in-law. He's like, dude, it's no problem. So whips out his little stamp. He gives her a 1-day visa to enter the UK, and it was no problem, right?
Nice.
So, we go off to the hotel. Of course, I was texting the wife the whole time while I'm standing in line for 8 hours, and we're trying to figure out what we're going to do. And so we finally get to the hotel, and it was clear to me that they knew there was something going on because there was a special line for British Airways delays at the hotel. I was like, okay, awesome. So I handed him the voucher, and he's like, have you guys eaten yet? And we're like, no. He's like, dude, we're going to keep the kitchen open for about half an hour more. So if you want to eat, go eat now. I'm like, yes, we are going to go eat right now. And I will tell you, that was the best leftover food I had ever had in my life.
Mhm.
It was like some Indian dish with like the basmati rice and like the curry. It was like the best curry I'd ever had at that point. So we get that and we get to our room, get our change, our clothes, because we've been in them for like 24 hours at this point. At least it felt like it. I start looking for flights to get us to Tijuana. So I found one that said that there were seats on it. It was direct from Mexico City straight to Tijuana. I'm cool, book it, right? All good. Get up in the morning, head off to Heathrow, or actually one step back, had breakfast at the hotel. Absolutely best hotel breakfast I had ever had in my life. I mean, they had the absolute full spread out, right? And if you've ever had European breakfast, you understand they have like the cold cuts, the tomatoes, the sliced cheese. They brought us a whole pot of coffee to the table, and I'm like, okay, I don't know when I'm going to eat next. If we learned anything from the day before, so it's like, let's not skip breakfast today.
Mhm.
So had a very nice breakfast, was amazing. Get to the airport, the lines were insane. I mean, insane. There were thousands of people at the British Airway booth. So this was clearly a systemic issue that they were having because a lot of people were delayed. And so they had these little electric check-in stations. where you could go just like scan your e-ticket and you're good to go. So the mother-in-law we were only carrying on, right? We didn't have any checked luggage. I asked the British Airway employee, hey, can I try this? Because it's like I don't want to stand in line for an hour. Right. So he's like, oh yeah, if it works, give it a go. Scan our tickets, our boarding passes pop out. I think we're good to go. Go over to security. I will say they are very anal in Europe about fluids on flights. So if you ever fly through Europe, just know that ahead of time. Make sure you're within the limits. We go up to security, and there's like the Star Trek door, right? What you have to do, you go up to the door, you scan your boarding pass, they take your picture, the Star Trek doors open, and you go through. So mother-in-law, not speaking English, there's no way I'm going to be able to describe to her what needs to be done. So it's better to show than to tell, as they say. So I go up there, scan my boarding pass, take the picture, walk through, everything's good, right? So I can see her on the other side. She does the same thing. Scans the boarding pass, red X. They're not letting her through. I'm like, what the heck? I'm like, do it again. Does it again. Same thing. So eventually a British Airway employee comes over. I'm like, what's going on here? What's the problem? They're like, oh, they want to see her visa to Mexico. Okay. I'm like, well, can I come back out there because she doesn't speak English? They're like, no, you're in the secure area now. If you come out, we can't let you back in. I'm like, okay. So how are we going to handle this? She's like, don't worry. I'll take care of it for you. Okay, thank you. And I call the wife. I'm like, well, we've hit a little bit of a snag, right? Because like at this point, I have no idea what's going to happen. I'm sitting in the space right before security. The mother-in-law and I are separated, have no idea what's going on. And my wife tells me the line of the trip, and this will be repeated. She says, well, if you can't make it work, just send her back to Poland. I'm just like, honey, we're in the UK. It's going to be incredibly difficult for me to do that while we're separated.
Right.
And it's like, I'm sure we can get this figured out. But one thing I want you guys to understand, when you're in a situation like this, it is possible that you may get separated from your group. And you have to be able to think independently, work independently, and have a plan for what you're going to do if that happens. So next prepper lesson from this bug out, be prepared to act on your own if you have to. And I'm not saying that's always going to happen, but it's something that can happen. So be prepared for it, mentally prepare for it now. Because if, it does happen and you have no idea, you're just like, well, what do I do? So practice these skills now. If you don't know how to start a fire with a fire steel, go out in the backyard and give it a go, right? If you have never used your water filter before, take it out of the box and give it a try, because the last time you want to be learning how these things work is when your life depends on it. So practice these skills now while they don't mean the difference between life and death. So great prepper lesson there. Eventually, the lady comes back. Everything was fine. They were able to cut in front of the line, so she didn't have to stand in line for an hour, which was kind of nice. Scans her boarding pass. She gets into the secure area. Thank heaven. We got through there. So I'm like, it's okay, honey. We got everything. We're good to go. Go through security. Again, this is when I found out about the liquids. So mother-in-law had a few too many liquids. They had to do some wipe tests on it. Everything was fine because it was just like perfume and stuff like that. But again, if you go flying through the UK, be aware of that. Yeah. And we get down into the waiting area, for lack of a better term, at Heathrow. And I get an email from the person that I booked the flight through, the company I booked the flight through, and they said, there's a problem with your flight to Tijuana. They didn't say what the problem was. So I turn on Wi-Fi calling. I'm trying to get through to somebody. I get bounced around to like 5 departments while we're waiting for our flight. Finally, somebody says, oh, they overbooked the flight and they can't, verify your ticket. I'm like, okay, because I initially thought that they just rejected the charge, right? And I'm looking at my card. I'm like, there's plenty of funds in here. Like, there's more than enough to cover like 3 flights to Tijuana. Mm-hmm. And they're like, well, we can't verify your ticket. I'm like, okay, so you're saying we don't have a flight? Yes, that's correct. I'm like, okay. We're literally about to board our flight to Mexico City at this point. Get on there. We're walking, to the jetway. And they're like, well, can we call you back in an hour? I'm like, no, I'm literally getting on the flight to Mexico City right now. I'm like, can you call my wife and maybe she can kind of, figure this out? Oh yeah. What's her number? Okay. So I give them her number. Do you guys think that they called my wife?
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it, huh?
No, they did not the entire time. So I think about this while we're mid-flight. We're basically over the Atlantic. And I'm like, you know what? Let's just spring and buy for a little fly-fi for like an hour. It sucks, by the way, if you've ever used airplane Wi-Fi and you pay for the cheapest one. It's terrible, but it's good enough to send a text message. So I text the wife. I'm like, hey, did they ever call you? She's like, no. I'm like, okay, cool. Good to know. I'm like, well, we're going to need to get a hotel. And she's like, maybe you ought to have your mom help you out with that. I'm like, okay, because I don't have the bandwidth to like book a hotel on the flight. So I text mom, hey, I need you to get us a hotel because we're probably going to have to stay in Mexico City at least tonight. And the other thing was on the entry form, they wanted to see where your hotel is going to be because they don't want you doing what we did. So she goes ahead and books the hotel for us. We get to Mexico City. The line through customs was ridiculous, not unsurprisingly. We get down there to the guy, and it's pretty clear like it was about shift change time, so he was kind of tired, probably pissed off that he's having to deal with all these foreigners, right? We get up there, he's like, oh, I need to see her visa. I give him the visa. He's like, no, this isn't the visa. I'm like, what are you talking about? This is the visa that you guys said. No, you need to get this other visa. Okay. Well, how do you want me to do that? Oh, you can get that online. I'm like, sir, you understand they disabled the Wi-Fi here in customs? How exactly am I supposed to get this visa for my mother-in-law? And he just kind of gives me the eye roll, right? And he's like, just give me your passport. So I gave her the passport. He walks off. 5 minutes later, he shows up. He's like, now, next time you come here, make sure you have this visa. I'm like, yes, sir, absolutely. Next time we come here, I'm totally going to have that visa.
Mm-hmm.
I'm never going back with that visa, guys. I'll just tell you that right now. So, again, sometimes you just kind of have to be able to think on your feet and be like, hey, bro, I can't do what you're asking me to do here. How are we going to fix this? And most of the time, people are willing to help you and take care of you and help you out if they need to. So we get to Mexico. I'm like, okay, I learned my lesson from Poland, right? Don't walk, take the freaking taxi. So go and I get the taxi. Taxi driver, let's just say, took us on a ride a little bit. I could tell he was kind of driving in circles to kind of run up the tab. So I'm like, okay, whatever. Because I literally saw the turnoff for the hotel and he missed it. I'm just like, all right. We're not getting a big tip. We'll just put it that way. So we pay him. We get there. We check in. Lovely place. Go up to our room. I look out the window. I can see the airport, and I literally see a walkway from the hotel to the airport. So it's like the one time I should have walked, I didn't. And the time that I shouldn't have walked, I did. So it was kind of like my running joke. It's like, okay, obviously I don't know when to take the taxi and when not to take the taxi. But yeah, it would have been nice if they would have mentioned, oh, yeah, you can just walk to the hotel from here. But yeah, he wanted to get his fare. So good for him. I hope he needed it. We get checked in. I figure out, okay, we got to start trying to figure out how to get out of Mexico City because let me just be honest with you guys. Mexico City is not a safe place. It's pretty nasty. I will say from the view from our hotel, which was connected to the airport, I could see like slums, for lack of a better term. It was, I'm not going to say that I heard like gunshots or anything like that, but it was funny because I was texting with some of my friends. They're like, dude, you going to go out and try the tacos there? I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? It's like, no. So always be aware of your surroundings in a bug out situation, guys, because your personal safety is your own, business at that point. And you're in a foreign country. You have no idea what's going on. Like we talked about at the beginning, cartels are a big issue. And especially now they're even worse. You see about people. Yeah, I know that's where the best food is, slow burn, but I am not willing to risk my life. And if I tried that, my wife would have killed me.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, honey, we left the hotel and we went to a taco stand. I'm not sure where they got the meat. Maybe it's like they did in Demolition Man. It was
only
meat.
got mugged twice, and
yeah, exactly. It's fine. I'll get fake passports. Don't worry about it, honey. No, thankfully we did not do any of that. But that night, I was looking for a flight. I found a flight to Monterrey, which is a pretty big touristy area. And so I'm like, okay, that's at least closer to the border. It's not on the border, but it's in the right direction. And we're getting out of Mexico City. Let's get it. It was stupid cheap. It was like $100. So I get us the flight. It was for that night, actually, at like 4 a.m. So I'm like, all right, let's get cleaned up. Let's get packed up. Yeah, dog tastes delicious. I'm sure it does, Mayhem. I don't know how you know that, and I don't know why how you figured it out, and I don't want to know. So don't tell us the story there, brother. So we get packed up. I drop the key off at the desk. We go down to get checked in. It's just like British Airways again. We're literally standing in line No one is moving. And it's like we're standing and standing. I'm like, we're not making this flight. There's literally no way we're making this flight. So I'm like, okay, we missed this one. Again, it wasn't a huge financial loss, so I wasn't too worried about it. But I'm like, how are we going to figure this out? Because we can't just sit here in Mexico City, right? This isn't accomplishing anything. So I'm texting with mom. I'm texting with the wife. They're sending me flights. I'm like, all of them are booked. Like, there's nothing. So she's like, why don't you just go to the ticket counter? So I go to the ticket counter. And we had been talking about, where we were going to cross, because at this point, everyone was going to Tijuana. And what they were doing, if you remember this back then, they were setting up like hostels, for lack of a better term, in gyms. Like, they were putting up cots for all of the refugees coming through who were claiming humanitarian parole from Ukraine. And so they're like, it's going to be like a 2 to 3 day wait in Tijuana when we get there, just to get our number called. So they're like, there's another crossing at Mexicali or Calexico, depending on which side of the border you're on. Why not try there? Okay, cool. So I go to the ticket booth, but I'm still having Tijuana in the back of my mind, because obviously they know what to do there. So I go to the ticket booth and I'm like, can you get us to Tijuana? Oh yeah, we can get you there in 5 days. I'm like, well, that's not going to work. I would rather not sit in Mexico for the better part of a week. And like, what about Mexicali? Oh, we can get you there in 3 days. I'm like, well, that's better than 5. Hard math on stream, but 3 is less than 5. So yes, Tacos del Labrador, absolutely the best. You guys are hilarious. I love your group here. This is a great channel. So I'm like, okay, let's take it. We have no other choice at this point. So another prepper lesson for you. Sometimes you're going to get delayed, guys, and you have to be prepared for that, because there are situations that are just out of your control. When you're in a bug out situation, there are a lot of things that are not within your sphere of control that you can't handle, and you have to roll with the punches. And I think that we have this idea of what our bug out's going to look like, but there are so many factors pulling you in different directions that you have to be ready for things to go wrong. And so, basically, I'm like, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to Calexico, Mexicali, book the flight. Of course, at this point, the credit card company had stopped allowing charges to my card. So I had to call them from Mexico City. Like, no, I'm legitimately trying to purchase this flight. Well, we noticed that you purchased a flight for today as well. Yes, I know we missed that flight. Please unlock my card. We need to send you a text. You guys know how it works, right? We had to go through all this while I'm standing at the ticket counter in Mexico City.
Right.
Good times. So basically, at this point, we camp out in the hotel, for lack of a better term. We did not leave the airport or the hotel the entire time. They had a 7-Eleven in the hotel or the airport. I'm not joking. It was legit 7-Eleven. So you feel like I could have made it faster by donkey, dude. At this point, I felt like it, slow burn. I really did. So it comes to the day when it's time to roll out. So we get all packed up. We're ready to go. And this whole time we had been talking about where we were going to cross the border. And Calexico was fine. There was another town, the most northern entry point into the United States and Mexico is a town called Los Alagones. What this town is known for is basically medical tourism, for lack of a better term, primarily dentistry. If you've never had dental procedures here in the United States and you don't have insurance, you'll find out that it's incredibly expensive, but it's a lot less expensive in Mexico to have the same thing done. So what people will do, they will literally drive down to this town on the border. They even have a parking lot now for people who are going to walk across. You go through and there's like tons of dental offices there. So we're like, okay, this is more safe than pretty much any other border crossing that we found, because there's lots of Americans there. They need our money. And so you're less likely to get into trouble. So seemed like a good idea, but we need to check, right? So I called the border office at Los Alagones. I explained the situation. Can I claim humanitarian from my mother-in-law at your location? Yes, absolutely, sir. It shouldn't be a problem. Called back 2 more times to make sure that I got different people that gave me the same answer. And then I also had my mother call. So again, we had another person calling to make sure they all gave us the same exact answer. Like, yes, you can do it. So I'm like, all right, let's do that, because it's going to be a safer place for us to cross. We get the flight. We go to Mexicali. We get off at Mexicali. Of course, my mother-in-law gets pulled across for a random passport check. Completely random. I walked through, but yeah, she got pulled off for random. Now, they were pulling everybody off with a foreign passport. It was about as random as something that's not random. I can't think of a good
Yeah.
line for that one, but yeah. So I'm standing there. I went ahead and booked our taxi to get to Los Alagones because it was a good like 30, 45 minutes away. I'm like, okay, we should be good. Get on the taxi. I'm literally watching the guy drive us there on my maps. I'm like, okay, is this guy trying to kidnap us? No. Okay, this is how I would drive if I was going there. So we get to Los Alagones, probably about a block and a half away from the border, right? Walk up there, totally fine. Lots of touristy stuff. I mean, it's your classic tourist trap, right?
Mhm.
Type town there on the border. Of course, we're going past all the dental offices, and I see the border. There's only like 24 people in line in front of us. I'm like, dude, we got it. I can see the United States. And of course, this whole time while the wife and I are trying to figure out where we're going to go, and she says, well, honey, if there's any problem, just send her back to Poland. I'm like, sweetheart, we're in freaking Mexico City at this point.
Yeah.
It's like, there's no way I can send her back to Poland right now. It's like for a poker term, we're pot committed, right?
Mhm.
So it's like we're committed at this point. We got to do it. So we get to Los Alagones. I text the mom. I text wife. I'm like, hey, we've got this in the bag, right? Go up there, get to the point where we're showing passports to the guard there. I said, hey, I need to claim humanitarian parole for my mother-in-law. Oh, we can't do that here, sir. I'm like, what? He's like, we can't do that here. I'm like, I called you guys' office yesterday. He said you could. Like, are you trying to tell me how to do my job, sir? I'm like, wait a minute here, bro. Let's step back here. No, I'm not telling you how to do your job. I'm just telling you what I heard. He's like, well, we can't do that. You need to step out of line. Okay, cool, no problem. So I made the one critical mistake on this trip of when we got to Mexicali, I should have called the border crossing again. I called the border crossing station. I talked to a manager. I'm literally standing outside their office, right? Of course, there's a nice gate between me and them. And they're like,
Mhm.
yeah, we can't do that. You're going to have to go back to Mexicali. I'm like, dude, I called your office yesterday and you said you could. He's like, well, why didn't you get here yesterday? I'm like, because I was sitting in an airport in Mexico City. That's why. It's like I could do like Slowburn is telling me, could I just take a donkey from Mexico City to here? I don't think so. So he's like, yeah, you're going to have to go back to Mexicali. I'm like, okay. So now we come to the point of like, how the heck do we get back to Mexicali? So there is no Uber service there, and Uber actually is more safe in Mexico than actual taxis, from what I've read, because you have all that information of your driver and stuff like that.
Mhm.
There's no Uber service, and I get on my maps, and there's one taxi company in the town, and we start going. And if there is one thing at this point I really would have liked to had, it would have been my concealed carry, because there is no Second Amendment there in Mexico,
Right.
obviously. And if you need ammo for your concealed carry, make sure you check us out, ammo.com/Chris. Get your free discount coupon. But we get there and I start walking. And of course, the wife is despondent at this point. She's just, upset. Send her back to Poland. I'm like, honey, how can I send her to Poland? There's literally no airport in this town. Um, you know, we've got to figure this out. So I start walking and I have this moment. And this is probably the thing that is going to stick with me for the rest of my life. I'm looking down this street and I have this moment where it's kind of like in the movies where you see like the center of the screen stays focused and everything on the side like pulls back like this. I had this moment looking down the street and I'm like, no, we're not walking down here. Like
Mhm.
we're not doing this. And so if there is, I've told you guys lots of prepper lessons for this whole story, but if there's one thing that sticks with you, if your gut tells you not to do something, do not do it. Listen to what your gut tells you guys, because I don't know if anything would have happened if I would have went down there, but it's just like I looked down it and something spoke to me and said, nope, don't do that. I'm not saying a literal voice came down to me, but his holiness did not reach down from the heavens and say, Chris, don't go down that street. But I just had this feeling. It's like, this is incredibly dangerous if I go down the street and we're going to get in trouble. I'm like, okay, so we're not doing this. So I did a complete 180, start walking back. And I'm like, okay, how are we going to figure this out? So I'm walking past this one dentist's office, right? And there's a doorman there. And he's like, oh, hey, sir, how you doing today? I'm like, not so hot. He's like, oh, what's going on? And he was a Mexican gentleman, spoke perfect English. I explained to him the situation. He's like, give me a minute. I can help you out. Okay. So at this point, I'm like, I have to trust this guy, right? Because I have no one else. I have nobody in Mexico. I don't know anybody in Mexico. I have no car. There's no rental places there. There's no place I can get a taxi. I can't get taxi service. So he starts making calls. And eventually he gets one of the dental techs from another office, basically said, yeah, I can take him back. And he asked me how much I paid to get there on the taxi. He's like, yeah, it's probably gonna be more. I'm like, I don't care.
Yeah.
Name your price at this point. So when we came to Los Alagones, we came in like a nice air conditioned car. It was really good. Quite the stark opposite when this gentleman pulls up in a freaking jalopy, right? I mean, it is just the windows are down because the air conditioner doesn't work. He's got like all sorts of stuff to fix his car in the trunk. Was barely able to even fit our backpack and my mother-in-law's carry on in there. And we start going. His name was Jose, and thankfully Jose spoke English, and we were just talking the whole trip back. And so another prepper lesson for you guys here is sometimes you may have to depend on the kindness of other people. And I know in the prepper community, we're like, oh, you gotta stay, just in our own circle. You can't trust anybody, but there may come a time where you have to. And this goes both ways, by the way. So if there's a time when someone needs your help, I highly recommend if it's in your capacity to do so, you try and help this person. I'm not saying at the debilitation or the loss of your family. Don't put yourself out there to the point where you can't survive. But if you can help somebody in a situation, do it. Because one, if you believe in karma, it'll come back to you later. But two, oh no problem, Chris. Thank you for being here for this. I appreciate it. I know we're going long, but we're getting to the interesting part here in a minute. But yeah, if you can help somebody in a situation, that could come back later to help you. And you just never know how far reaching your acts may be. So I will say that, yes, there are a lot of nasty people in Mexico, but the average citizen, the normal person, the person just working a 9 to 5 is going to be, for the most part, good people. So I don't want people to be like, oh, yeah, all Mexicans are bad. It's not true, guys. There are a lot of good people there who are just trying to make it just like you and me. And they're not illegally crossing the border. So Jose and I and the mother-in-law hop in his jalopy. And I want to tell you guys about what Mexican GPS is. This is my personal favorite, right? So he's driving us back. And again, I'm like watching him. I'm like, are we going the right way? Yeah, we are. We're going the exact way again that we came with the taxi the first time. So we're going in there and we get to Mexicali. He's like, oh, hang on a second. I got to stop at like this basically convenience store. He needed to get more coolant for the car because apparently his radiator was leaking. And so at this point, I understand that his transmission also wasn't working because when he got out, he had to literally pop the hood, reach down, push the thing into gear or out of gear. So like his shifter didn't work. His shifter just stayed in the same spot the whole time. So he's manually shifting it by reaching down and actuating the transmission, which was freaking hilarious. But we get there and Mexican GPS, right? You think, oh, we're just going to whip out our smartphone. We're going to punch it in. That's how we do it. No, Mexican GPS is you find somebody standing on the street and you be like, hey, bro, how do we get to the border crossing? Oh, you go down to the taco stand and then you make a left and then it's like half a kilometer up. Of course, I don't speak Spanish. I don't know if that's what he said, but that's what it was. It's like you
Right.
talk to these guys standing out on the street. Like, how the heck do you get here? I'm not from this town.
It's amazing how dependent we are on our phones now for navigation. It is
Really
crazy.
is.
So
It's kind of
different.
scary, honestly, because if people don't have it, they have no idea how to get anywhere or actually how to just ask for directions. So yeah, another thing, guys, if you can learn, if you have paper maps, I know those are incredibly hard to come by, but if you don't have paper maps in your bug out bag, you are at a severe disadvantage. So get those now, and they're freaking cheap. So especially for your local area, if you're planning a local bug out, make sure you have that. So Jose gets us to the border. He actually accidentally went down the car line, which of course he couldn't go through because one, he's Mexican, he can't cross the border, and through the car line, and two, I couldn't do it. So we had to literally stop. He had to get out. He put the e-brake on, right? Steps out, pops the hood, puts the thing in reverse. He's like sputtering as we go back up the hill. Thankfully, there was several lines that weren't in service, so we were able to back up. And the car died at one point during this. So we had to put the e-brake back on, start the car back up, go out, put it back into reverse, sputter it back up to the top of the hill, turns down the correct lane and gets us right there. I still have Jose's number in my phone. He said, dude, if there's any problem, if you need any help with anything, if you guys can't cross tonight, give me a call. Let me know. I can translate for you. whatever you need, just call me. So I gave Jose a big hug. I gave Jose a big freaking tip too, because without this guy, I don't know
Yeah.
what we would have done. It's like the mother-in-law would have been stuck in Mexico. I could have crossed, but like, what are we going to do?
Right.
At that point. So yeah, and be generous if you can for people who help you, because without them, you're going to be up a creek, for lack of a better term. So now we finally get to the border, right? We're coming to the climax of everything here. So we get to the border. We're standing in line. It's not too bad. There's maybe like 50, 60 people going through here. And I'm looking through this. I'm like, where are all the freaking Ukrainians at, right? Because we hear about, it kind of looked like that. That's a great picture there. But we get through the line. We're walking. I'm like, all of these people are like locals or Americans. Like, where's the line for the Ukrainians? Because I had heard that there were people crossing there. So we get up close to the front, and I'm like, those people look Slavic to me. So I tell the mother-in-law, go over, talk to them. She waves me over. I'm like, yeah, okay. These were the volunteers. So what was happening at this point is there were people from the United States who were helping people cross at these borders, who spoke both Russian, Ukrainian, and English. So they're volunteers. There were tons of them at Tijuana. I had heard about them. We found them, We found them there while we're at the border, and they're like, yeah, come over here. So we're standing out in the heat for a couple hours. That was fun. And of course, we, again, have not changed clothes, and we'll get to that here in about 18, 20 hours in the Mexican heat. So they called the mother-in-law back. Now, what we had is we have family friends who live in San Diego, and they were going to come pick us up at the border. So I'm thinking, okay, they took the mother-in-law back. We are good to go, right? We're doing great. So I text them. I'm like, hey, if you guys want to start coming, go for it, because it's going to take them a good 2 hours to get there from San Diego. Like, yeah, we're on our way. We're going to stop and pick up some refreshments for you. I'm like, thank goodness, because I'm tired of eating hotel Mexican food. So we go back, and I'm standing there. I'm like, well, what the hell do I do at this point? I'm like, I'm talking to the volunteers. I'm like, should I go across the border and wait for her? Like, what's going on? They're like, I would wait here just for a minute. Let's figure out what's going on. So I went out and I bought everybody there who was still outside water. Because again, it was freaking hot, and it cost me like $2 to buy 10 water bottles that were like a liter a piece. So I bought all that for them, because these people are helping us, and they're giving their own time to help these refugees get across the border. So got everybody out, and then one of the volunteers comes back. He's like, hey, do you want to go sit with your mother-in-law? I'm like, yeah, that's probably a good idea. He's like, okay. He's like, I'm going to tell everybody that you're one of the volunteers. He's like, just don't cause any problems. I'm like, dude, trust me. At this point, the last thing I am going to do is raise a fuss. So we go back there, and it's kind of like the doctor's office is the best way I can describe it. When you're at the doctor's office, you have the front waiting room, and then they take you back to what I like to refer to as the second waiting room, where you wait for the doctor to show up. That's kind of how this was. Now, this was the interesting part. So they had these benches, right? So we're all sitting on these concrete benches, but there was a separate bench for, well, let's just say all the Mexicans. And then there was this other bench for where, all the Ukrainians were at. And so they were, okay, let's see here. Slow burn. Yeah. You went to Mexico all the time. That's cool, man. That's really cool. But yeah, renting a car in Mexico, that would be interesting. I'm kind of glad I didn't do it, but in some ways I kind of wish I had. But in any case, so we're sitting there, and there are obviously two lines, and the lines for the Mexicans coming through was going through greased lightning, for lack of a better term. And we're sitting there, they're getting one family through at a time. And it took about an hour per family. So I text our friends. I'm like, take your time getting here, because it's going to be a hot minute before we get through this line. They're like, oh, don't worry about it. We'll wait for you. They're like, we'll meet at the Jack in the Box across the border. I'm like, okay, good to know. So what they were doing at this point was they were taking women and children first, which totally cool with that. I get it. I have small children. The last thing I want them to do is sitting out in the heat, because, a hot child is a cranky child for the most part. And so totally fine with them getting, families with children through first. We get to the point where all of the kids and families were taken care of, right? And we've been sitting there for 3 hours in the second waiting room. And then what they tell us is that there was overflow from Tijuana that was going to be bussed over, because at this point, Tijuana was packed. They were at capacity. Like I said, they were setting up hostels and school gyms, churches, anywhere they could find it. So they're like, there's like 3 families coming. So all of the Ukrainians who had been incredibly reserved, polite, quiet, at this point all get pissed off because it's like we've been sitting here all day and these people hop off the bus and they get to go in front of us. Like, WTF, bro? It's basically the best way I can say it. So it's like they all start talking to the volunteers, and the volunteers like, there's nothing we can do. This is Border Patrol that's saying this. We got to do what they say. And I'm like, okay, we get that. But I'm like texting with the wife. She's like, well, if you can't get her across today, just send her back to Poland. I'm like, honey, are you freaking kidding me?
It sounds like she's trying to get her mother to go back to Poland to begin with.
Right. I'm wondering if she really
it
wants
seems that
her
way,
there.
but it's like she's like, well, we can't spend any more money on this. I'm like, sweetheart, I am sitting on the border. I can throw a rock and hit the United States from where I'm at. It's like, no, honey. It's like, if we can't get through today, there's literally a hotel across the street. It's like, I will get us a hotel room and we will come back first thing in the morning tomorrow. It's like, we are doing this one way or another. And so if I can give you guys some advice as, a prepper, and the puppy's here, she's wanting attention. In these situations, be strong is basically what I can say. You need to be the calm in the storm, for lack of a better term. When everyone else is freaking out around you, you need to be the calm and the rational one, because you are a prepper. You've done the work ahead of time. You know what to do. You know how to do it. So just go out there and do it, brothers and sisters. Be that calm voice in the storm that says, no, we're not going to freak out. We're not sending the mother-in-law back to Poland. We're going to freaking do this. And because I'm not going to quit until I win. So having that attitude of like, no, we're doing this and we're going to get it done, can give a lot of confidence to people who maybe don't have it. So being able to do that and say that is a really strong thing. So I recommend that you try and be that calm in the storm, that rock that everybody can count on in a situation. So, calm under fire, right? For lack of a better term. So the volunteers come back, they say, okay, we're going to take some singles, meaning people who didn't have kids. And so eventually they take like one group that was like a boyfriend and her girlfriend and their mother. And they take them back and they're like, okay, we're going to take you guys next, meaning me and my mother-in-law. So the whole time the volunteers had been coaching them. They're like, okay, when you get back, here's the password: humanitarian parole. This is what you need to say to them. So I'm like talking with the mother-in-law when we're back. I'm like, okay, you remember the words, right? She's like, da, da, which is yes in Russian. I'm like, what is it? Da, da. I'm like, no, humanitarian parole. Da, da. I'm like, oh boy, we're in trouble. So they eventually call us back, and I think they had a shift change at Border Patrol because we got the happiest Border Patrol agent I have seen in my life. This lady comes back. She's like, oh, who's next? And they're like, oh, this gentleman here, he's a U.S. citizen. He's escorting his mother-in-law, across for humanitarian parole. Oh, that's awesome. That's so cool that you're doing that. They're like, can he go back there with her? Oh, definitely. Come on back. You're more than welcome. I'm like, okay, good. This is great, right? So we go, and they take us back to this little office. Is air conditioned, which was amazing. And we sit down, and we get to this jolly big guy. Again, I think it was he just started his shift. He's like, so, and they passed her my mother-in-law's passport. Miss Karpenko, what can the United States do for you? And the mother-in-law just has deer in headlights on her face. And I'm like, Mom, now's the time. Say it. Da, da. I'm like, no. Humanitarian parole. And she like ekes out the word humanitarian like with me. And he's like, it's okay. I understand what she needs. I'm like, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank God.
Yeah. It's like, we've been standing outside all day. I've been sweating my rear end off. And so he goes through this, and they had to, of course, fingerprint her when she came across. Her hands were so dry, they couldn't get her fingerprints. They needed her basically to like rub her, her hands on her forehead to get some oil on there to do it. She couldn't figure that out. I literally had to take her hand, put it on my forehead, and rub it across there a couple times. Like, okay, now do it. Of course, we had technical difficulties with the computer, and they had to restart the computer system. But eventually, they finally got everything to poop out. They're like, okay, you're in. We stamp this. Like, keep this in your passport. This is your humanitarian parole. You're good here for a year. They explain all that. Thank you so much. They take me up to the front of the line. I had my own border patrol escort to the front of the line. They're like, this gentleman needs to be checked out next. I'm like, yeah, I'm the freaking boss here, right?
Yeah.
So stamped out. I mean, it was literally like 10 seconds for me. They're like, welcome back to the United States. Thank you, sir. It's been a journey. And so we get out. I take a picture out in front of the border patrol office because my wife the whole time had been like, I'll be happy when I get the picture. Right. Because everybody who had been doing this was taking the picture outside of Tijuana and posting it. I'm like, okay, I'm taking the picture, right? And I send it to her. And she's like, what does this mean? I'm like, honey, she's like, does she get to stay? I'm like, this is the picture you've been waiting for this entire week that we've been doing this. Yes, she gets to stay. We're through. And of course, my phone is dying at this point.
Right.
So I'm like, I got to save my battery. I'll call you when we get to the car. So we're walking through Calexico, right? And I have guys like soliciting me for taxi rides. He's like, hey, you need to go to San Diego. I'm like, no, we got to ride. What, do you not like Mexicans? No, I'm good, sir. Thank you. Yeah, she didn't say it was too late to take her back to Poland, thankfully. But we get to Jack in the Box. Our friends are there. We get in the car. Basically, they had a van. They took us there to their home in San Diego. And one thing that I noticed, another prepper lesson for you guys, two of them actually, your clothes are probably not as durable as you think that they are, especially in really oppressive conditions. Like what we were in, your clothes are going to deteriorate a lot faster than you think. And the second thing, pack extra socks, guys, because if your feet get in trouble, you're dead in the water. If you're planning on taking the Ankle Express, which if things go really bad, that's your only option, and you don't have your feet, you're dead at that point. So I've always had chronic issues with like athlete's foot and stuff like that. My feet were messed up after that. It would have been nice to have had another pair of socks, and of course I took multiple with me, but I burned through them because it took us about a week to get there. So guys, pack extra socks in your bug out bag. That's the best thing I can tell you right now, because you will be happy when you can change them out. So after that, yes, absolutely. The light hiking wool socks, those merino wool socks, really good stuff, guys.
Yep.
So invest in that. I don't care if it costs a couple extra dollars. You will thank me later. So we get to their house in San Diego. We get all taken care of. I buy a ridiculously expensive flight back to Chicago. And we had no problem getting back after that. Since then, my wife and I have had our first child together, so she got to be here for the birth of her grandchild, which is really cool.
Nice.
We've been able to apply for what's called temporary protected status to be able to keep her here longer. And guys, I don't want any of you to think that your tax dollars are going to pay for this, because I can promise you that they're not. I have not
You
received.
haven't gotten the check?
They keep telling me it's in the mail, right? But it just never shows up. No. So when you're here on humanitarian parole, it's different than refugee status. And so we have not gotten anything from the government except for emergency health care, which, like I said, covers literally nothing. And doesn't even cover vaccinations, by the way, your standard stuff, like measles, mumps, things like that. I had to pay for that out of pocket. So guys, I don't want you to think that I'm tax burdening you by bringing my mother-in-law here. We've been taking care of her, but it's been an experience. It was the trip of a lifetime, to say the least. And there are a lot of good lessons from all of that
Yeah.
that I think that as preppers we can learn. And a lot of it, I think, is mental preparation, but also just having really durable clothes, socks especially, and being able to be flexible are probably the biggest things that I can tell you about when having to go through a situation like this, because nothing's going to go to plan.
Yeah. Nah, dude, that's awesome. What a journey, to hear it unfold. It's like, yeah, no, that's crazy. I can't even imagine. And, to have some perspective of what's involved in that kind of thing, no, we appreciate it.
No, I was glad to do it. And there are just so many lessons that I learned on that trip, and so many things that I felt like we as preppers can glean from that, that it could save a lot of people, I think. And that's really why I wanted to tell this story, because, we want to help. We want to make more preppers, right? Because the more preppers we have, the less marauders there are when S.H.T.F happens. So, guys, if you can get prepared now, make sure you're doing that. Make sure you're watching this channel here, because these guys are awesome. I really appreciate you guys having me back on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, it's great having you.
No, I enjoy it.
All
I
right.
love coming out here and talking with you guys. You got some great people here on your audience. Hilarious comments. I love you guys. And yes, the Labrador
We
tacos.
do have the entertainment.
Yeah, the Labrador tacos are probably my favorite comment of the whole
That's
live stream
it.
here.
All right. So we appreciate it. With that, safe, and we will talk to you guys next week.